Hey, everybody, welcome to the Jim Masters Show, entertainment, lifestyle, variety talk show series. How's everybody doing today? It's so good to see you, and we thank you very much for making us a part of your day, whatever time of day it is, because we know that you guys watch the series at whatever time is convenient for you. Because we have an international audience, folks watch us in the morning, the afternoon, the evening, late night, whenever they can. And we say thank you to everybody who has been following along our really cool series where we're bringing back the lost art of conversation and style with all of you and you and you and you. And as you know, the guests come in from all around the world, from all different disciplines and levels of celebrity and expertise and so much more. We have so much fun having an opportunity to connect with all of you, converse with all of you, and our amazing guests. And we have viewers who watch us literally from the United States, Canada, Europe, Asia, Africa, Australia, New Zealand, all points of the globe. And we think that's fantastic. If this is your first time joining us here on the Jim Masters Show, thanks for being here. Thanks for flipping through the dial, as we would say, Mr. Television and Radio here, flipping through the dial. If you just stumbled on our show, stay right here. And you could also binge some almost 750 episodes as well, because we've done a lot of shows since we launched this series roughly about 2 years ago. It was like late April, early May of 2020 when we launched the series. But really cool to have you here, and really cool to have our guest who's coming in just a minute, Bryan S. Wright. He is a Ph.D. and he is coming to us from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and he's a brilliant pianist, musicologist. He's also founder and owner of Rivermont Records, and he knows everything jazz and ragtime and so much more. And there's this unearthing of an amazing vintage album that we're going to be talking about, which is very, very exciting. So he's in the thick of the music world. He loves it. It's, again, something he's been doing for a long time, created the record company. We're going to talk about Rivermont as well. He hails originally from beautiful Lynchburg, Virginia, USA. He makes his home in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And we're going to have him on in just a second. Really a pleasure to have him here. And there is his photo. Yeah. And again, he's a brilliant pianist, as well a musicologist. If you don't know what a musicologist is, we'll have Bryan tell us the work of a musicologist. I mean, he's in the thick of it. He lives and breathes music, an aficionado. And you know, I love music as well. We talk a lot. We've had a lot of musical guests actually on our show from all genres of the musical world. So Bryan will be with us in just a second. First, welcoming everybody. And if you would like to chat during the show, our JMS Lovely chat room is open and available. That is for subscribers to our YouTube channel. Now, there's no cost to subscribe. The YouTube channel is Jim Masters TV. So if you want to chat right now in the JMS Lovely chat room amongst yourselves, and we can see some of those comments as well, feel free to subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't. And make sure when you do, you click that notification bell, because the notification bell alerts you about all the amazing episodes we have in advance, so you don't miss any of them and you can participate. Also, don't forget to leave a comment on our YouTube channel underneath the episode as well, and give this a thumbs up if you enjoy what we're going to present to you here on the show. A busy day for me, as always, television, radio, always running around, but always making time to be with all of you, which I absolutely love. This series has been really a labor of love. A lot of blood, sweat, and tears, a lot of hours, a lot of work behind the scenes to put it all together, but loving every second of it. So if you're inspired by what we're doing here, if you're entertained, you have some laughs, because we have it all, that's terrific. And thanks for all the great comments, folks. You guys have been really on fire, sharing the links on your social media as well, on your Instagram and Facebook and Twitter pages. You can find me on all those places, those crazy platforms, at Jim Masters TV. Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook as well. And of course, our YouTube channel, Jim Masters TV. All right, it is time to welcome our fantastic guest, live and direct from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And we were talking about, of course, you know, Bryan had said, you know, a lot of times when people talk about Pittsburgh, the very first thing that they mention is the Pittsburgh Steelers. Of course, the football team. Sure, absolutely. Great legendary team. But I mentioned to him Mr. Rogers. He says, usually people don't bring that up first. Of course, Pittsburgh is where at WQED, PBS is where Mr. Rogers' neighborhood was created, filmed, and founded with Fred Rogers. And Pittsburgh is the home to that, as well as home to the Three Rivers, too. So Bryan is here. Let me tell you just a little bit about Bryan, if I haven't already. Pianist, musicologist, specializing in ragtime and early jazz piano styles. And with his wife, he has performed and lectured on ragtime across the United States and abroad, and released 2 full-length solo CDs, Syncopated Musings and Breaking Notes. He is the founder and executive producer of Rivermont Records, a Grammy-nominated label specializing in ragtime and early jazz. Bryan holds degrees in historical musicology from the College of William and Mary and the University of Pittsburgh, where he is presently an instructor as well. In addition to all of that, as a musicologist, he completed, again, his doctorate at the University in Pittsburgh. He has written articles for the Grove Dictionary of American Music, Oxford Bibliographies Online, and presented papers at both local and national meetings of the Society of Ethnomusicology and the American Musicology Society. And in 2005, he was winner of the Lowens Award presented by the Capital Chapter of the American Musicological Society. As I said, he loves what he's doing, and he's been doing this for a long time. He's also traveled abroad. He's had performances in France and Japan and Argentina and lots more. And he's done also lecturing and played, for some of the most prestigious jazz and ragtime festivals across the United States, including the Scott Joplin International Ragtime Festival. And he's also played at the JVC Jazz Festival in New York City. Also has performed at the San Antonio Ragtime Festival, the Oklahoma Centennial Ragtime Festival, the Blind Moon Ragtime and Early Jazz Festival in Missouri, Central Pennsylvania Ragtime Festival, and so much more. Again, he lives and breathes the music. He absolutely loves it. And he's also been on radio. He's done radio as well. So we speak the same language. Matter of fact, you guys know I love radio and television as much as, internet and streaming and all. And I started in radio and television. And he has a real thirst for early radio, like the 20s and the 30s and the 40s. And that the vintage sounds of the stations, the announcers, the call letters, the music, the commentary, the shows, which I think is fantastic, sort of an old school quality, and bringing it up to date for all of us today. So join me in welcoming our very special guest, Bryan S. Wright, Ph.D., to the Jim Masters Show here today. And again, if you guys want to comment, feel free to do that. It's good to have you here. Bryan, welcome, coming to us direct from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. How are you?
Hi, Jim. I'm well, thanks, and hello to all the lovities out there. It's really a pleasure to be here.
That's it. Bryan got the memo. We told him about the lovities. And well, now, what happens when you're on the show, my friend, everybody designates you a lovity as well. So you're now part of the Jim Masters Show lovity family. Not too shabby, huh?
Well, I'm pleased to join the club.
There's, I always say to all the guests, there are, as we know, Grammys and Emmys and Tellys, Peabodys, Oscars, Tonys. But when you get a lovity on the Jim Masters Show, I would imagine probably your feet are tingling right now. It's usually what the guests say, their feet start tingling.
Well, especially since I'm at home and don't have my shoes on. It's fair to say they are quite tingly.
You are right there in wonderful Pittsburgh, but you hail originally from Lynchburg, Virginia. Tell us early on, Bryan, what are some of the things and I would imagine it was probably early on as a child where music started to really take hold of you. For me, as much as I love television and radio and all, music for me is right there as well. I used to always, as a kid, especially on Saturdays, we had the big, huge wooden stereo system, turntables, the radio, AM, FM, all of it built in that my folks had in New York, out east on Long Island. The big, when a lot of when television and radio and stereos were furniture. And I would go on a Saturday and lean up, get on a chair, lean up and lean into we used to have a lid. I remember you press down the lid, this big wood lid, and the lid would lift up. And inside was the turntable, the AM/FM radio, the slot for all the albums where they're kept. And I used to, once in a while, I would pull out albums by Bert Kaempfert and a lot of these names, and then bring them into my bedroom and put them on my little phonograph that probably came out of the Sears Wish book and listen to this music early on, when I'm like 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And, we would play, my sister, we would all play, with our toys and stuff like that, with that kind of music that my father listens to in the background. So, listening to my parents' music gave me, and of course the AM stations as well out of New York and the FM, this early understanding and appreciation of music that I wouldn't normally at those early ages necessarily have access to, because it was music that maybe would be what the adults were listening to. But I think it gave me a fabulous appreciation for all genres of music. How about for you? Did you have a similar thing? Were you listening to all kinds of music early on as a kid?
Yes. It's funny you mentioned having one of those big furniture console phonographs, and one of my favorite pictures of myself as a child is one where I am leaning into one of those old consoles that my grandmother had and listening to I don't know what. But from the time I was a young child, my favorite toy was always my Sesame Street battery-operated record player that I was given as, I think, about an 18-month-old. A great aunt got it for me for Christmas, and I was that kid all through preschool. While everybody else had little toys of little cars, little dolls, little things they would carry around, I was the one walking around the classroom with a fistful of 45s and my little Sesame Street record player, and would love to just sit down and open that thing up and play records. That, as a kid, about the best thing that could happen to me if I got in trouble was to be sent to my room, because I would go there and just open the record player, and I had a great time.
You had it all there.
Yeah, my interest in music stretches way back to before I can remember, really.
So when you were playing that Sesame Street phonograph, do you recall what you were playing? Were you playing the music of the day, or were you playing music that was a little bit more old school or variety? What were you actually playing as a kid? What was some of the music you recall hearing first in your life?
The earliest records I remember having, this would have been when I was in preschool. I had the Candyman. I had a number of. I can't
believe you said that. That's just. I have an instrumental version of that. I'm a big instrumental collector, but I have like hundreds and hundreds of cassettes and thousands of CDs and LPs, sealed LPs, and a climate-controlled storage bin that we pay monthly for. It has that in it, and it has my. Copies of my television work that you want preserved in case there's a fire or a flood. It's in that climate-controlled unit. But I was just listening to an instrumental version of the Candyman like yesterday. Sammy Davis Jr. from Willy Wonka.
Well, I had the children's knockoff version of the Candyman, but it sounds a lot like the Sammy Davis Jr. version. But then I had the standard kiddie records, the little Walt Disney book and record sets. But about the time I was 4 or 5 years old, an uncle gave me a box of his 45s that included some Paul McCartney and Wings, that included Brewer and Shipley, that included a lot of stuff from the late 60s and early 70s. And I think it was really those Paul McCartney records where he was doing sort of a throwback to the 20s and 30s, because, he would occasionally do that. And I think that provided the sort of seed for my interest in early American popular music of the ragtime and early jazz eras. All through elementary school, well into high school, my real love was rock and roll of the 50s and 60s. That's what got me out of bed in the morning. That's what I listened to most often. And eventually, as friends and neighbors, relatives learned of my interest in music, they would give me records, and I would take these hand-me-down things, everything from Ferranti and Teicher to,
Oh yeah, the twin
Mantovani,
pianos. Yeah.
Percy Faith. You get lots of
Oh
that, but I
sure.
was always looking for, the Errol Garner. I was looking for the Charlie Christian, for the jazz, for some of the rock and roll. And as these things came my way, my taste just started expanding to include these things I was given. And eventually my taste pushed back to the big band era, and then back into the hot jazz of the 20s and 30s, back to the ragtime era. And I mean, to this day, I love it all. I have fairly eclectic taste, but I think my heart has really settled in that ragtime and early jazz era.
What was the piano the very first instrument that you went towards? Because sometimes people end up with an instrument, but maybe they did something else first. There's a number of people that I talk to that are brilliant guitarists, but the first thing that they did was the piano, or they tried the violin. For me, it was the violin first. But how about you?
For me, it was piano first. I remember going to a community talent show when I was again, about in kindergarten, preschool, kindergarten. And I heard somebody play a selection from Mendelssohn's Songs Without Words.
Mm.
And it absolutely floored me. And as soon as that show was over, I asked my parents, I said, I want to learn to play piano. And I think they
Yeah.
kind of shrugged it off. I was 4 years old. What is, this is just something he's saying in the moment. He won't stick with it. But I kept asking, and for a few months I asked, and finally they said okay, and they rented a piano and started me on piano lessons, and I studied classical piano from the time I was in kindergarten up through college, really. And along the way, I think I found ragtime because it sort of hybridized my interest in rock and roll and that sort of pop aesthetic with the classical technique that I was learning with piano, playing the Beethoven sonatas, playing the Mozart sonatas and the Chopin etudes, and being able to take that rhythm that I was hearing in sort of rock and roll and apply it to the keyboard, because that's how I heard ragtime at the time. And that's what started my interest in that realm, and it just took off in college.
So when you were in school, whether it was junior high or even college, were you tasked with performing? Like when school plays were on, were you playing the piano for, the play, or were you involved in school plays and musicals and things like that through your schooling?
I did. I went to a middle school that had an especially strong drama program, and they would put on several musicals every year. And I would sometimes be on stage. I would try out and be an actor and singer on stage. But towards the end of my time in middle school, when they realized I could play piano reasonably well, I was sort of conscripted to be accompanist for some of these things. And I enjoyed that too. I think I would have rather been on stage, but I still enjoyed playing the piano in the pit.
In the pit, exactly. So as you're doing that, who are some of the folks that you were being inspired by, people that maybe you were following or you became a fan of, or maybe even, if lucky enough, became a mentor for you? Who were those folks at that time?
Well, I mean, in my personal circle, of course, my piano teacher, Sandra Horwege, who was with me from the time I started until I graduated high school. There were some local people that were very helpful to me, very encouraging to me. I mean, on a more professional level, the sort of musicians I looked up to, I think at that time, I went through a phase where I was really keen on George Winston, and just went out and bought every George Winston record I could find. And just, again, it was solo piano, but it was not the standard classical repertoire that I was learning, which at that time I was somewhat indifferent to. I wasn't enamored of a lot of the classical sonatas I was having to play. I didn't hate them, but it didn't speak to me the way that the more pop-ish stuff did. So George Winston I looked up to. Fats Waller became an early source of inspiration to me as well. Jelly Roll Morton. Again, as my taste gravitated more towards jazz, I started pulling in more of these jazz pianists, James P. Johnson, like I said, Errol Garner, and just listening to a lot of that. I think the real light bulb moment for me musically, though, that sort of redirected my whole life was when I first heard the music of Bix Beiderbecke, 1920s cornetist. And I remember I only knew about his playing the cornet for the first year or so that I was familiar with him. And then I got a compilation of Bix's recordings. And in the middle of this was a piano solo. And I pulled out the notes and I was like, well, who was playing the piano? And was shocked to learn that it was Bix himself, that he was also a pianist who actually started out on that instrument and then eventually added cornet. But Bix became my musical idol. Just his sense of harmony, his sense of rhythm, his sense of melody, I think, above all. When he improvises on the cornet, every improvisation is a exquisitely crafted melody, and I loved that.
Do you also, I know there is this, and it happens often with music and a lot of things in life. There's sometimes it's the yin and the yang of it all. It happens a lot in country music. You hear there is the old school country music, the original sounds, the original performers, and there's sort of that new school, more popish sound, contemporized versions of country music, which has, its legions of fans as well. In jazz, there is the early jazz, the traditional jazz, and then there's also the smooth jazz, and you have some of the Peter Whites and the Dave Kazes and the Yellow Jackets and the Ripping Tins and all of the smooth jazz world as well. I know it gets you choked up. Just talking about jazz gets them all choked up and emotional. If you need a Kleenex, you can grab one.
I have some. No, my apologies. I have a slight cold today.
Oh no,
so
yeah, he's got some. You want a sip of the coffee? He's got some coffee. Yeah, I'll do it too. He's got the hot coffee, and I got the cold brew because our audience knows whenever I make hot coffee, it ends up being cold because I never get to it quick enough. Mm. So cheers, my friend. Yeah. So nice to have you here on the Jim Masters Show. Smooth jazz is a different sort of take on it, but do you appreciate, I know sometimes the traditionalists are, I don't like smooth jazz at all. No. Same thing with country music. I don't like the new pop sounding stuff. I like the traditional. How about you? Do you enjoy elements of the more contemporary smooth jazz sounds that you hear as well? Or are you strictly, early jazz, traditional?
That's a very interesting question, and I almost hate to answer it because I think I've never revealed to my friends in the jazz world that my first exposure to jazz that I can remember really was through Kenny G, of all people. When I was in middle school, my mom had, like a lot of women at the time, had the Kenny G CDs around the house, and I would listen to that. And in my mind, as a 10 or 11-year-old, that was sophisticated music. That was what adults listened to, and I liked it. I did, and I don't listen to it as much anymore. But I respect the musicianship. I respect the craftsmanship that goes into a lot of those kinds of performances, and so I don't knock it. It's not my preferred listening anymore, but I hear it and I enjoy it when I hear it.
Do you like Dave Grusin and David Benoit and all of them too?
I do. I have a handful of CDs by each of them downstairs. Again, they don't come off the shelf all that often, but when the mood is right, sometimes that's what you want.
You put it in something rhythmic and contemporized a little bit. Right. Wasn't Kenny G, I think there was something with Kenny G where it's really an incredible thing, where he has the ability to play with his breath in a way where he can hold a note for forever. He can just continue to pour out the air into that sax for like the longest time. And some people have this unbelievable ability to be able to, I forget what they call it. There's a
circular breathing.
Yeah, he's able to just, I don't know if he did Star Spangled Banner. There was something he did, I believe, if I'm correct, where he held the note for the longest anybody ever did on that instrument just continued to be able to do it. That's fascinating, huh? That's a gift.
It is. I mean, it's a skill. It's a skill that's, I'm sure, developed over a lot of years of training,
Yeah,
and it is.
it absolutely is. So for you, like you mentioned, the piano near and dear to your heart. When you started with the piano, do you recall? I remember we would always go up to my aunt and uncle's house up in Massachusetts. My aunt's originally from Vienna, Austria, and they had this beautiful piano off in the dining room. And as a kid, I would always run into them. We'd go up to visit them on my mother's side of the family. And I would, the first thing before I even ate lunch, oh, can I go to the piano? And I'd run to the piano and I would have a little cassette recorder. And I still have the cassettes, which is kind of cool. And I would sit there and by ear in the beginning, just start playing things out that I remember hearing. Of course, you play heart and soul, da-da-da-da-da. That never really did chopsticks or any of that. I know that's always an introductory way to start, but heart and soul was the first one I did. It was by ear. And then the theme to All in the Family, da-na-na-na-na-na-na, very perfect for the piano. And I have cassettes of that where I'm like 12 years old on my aunt and uncle's piano. It was an upright, and I believe it came over from Austria, and just playing along by ear. Do you have the ability to do by ear as well as being, expertly trained as you are?
I do. As a kid, I would sometimes play things by ear as well. I don't consider myself primarily an ear player. I have worked up arrangements of pieces by ear for things where either sheet music wasn't available or I just couldn't find it. But as a classically trained pianist, I still gravitate towards playing things as the composer wrote them. I guess it's more of a personal choice at this point. That's just where I feel more comfortable.
Speaking of composing, do you like to compose? Do you like to create music as well, Brian?
I do. I don't do it very often. I've composed a half dozen pieces or so, but it's not something I do on a regular basis. There are some people who just have that creative spark and can. I know some pianists who are friends, acquaintances who are just brilliant composers. They can spin out melodies, gorgeous things. I know they work at it, but they're very, very good at it. And I just, as a composer, find that I don't have quite that knack for creating something really original that's still beautiful. If I can admit it, I tend to sort of fall back on cliches a little too often, and I try it sometimes, but not often.
So, when you decided to create Rivermont Records, I had asked this, and you had a brilliant answer. I said, he's in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and that's where the three rivers come together. And it's the city. I was on a TV show in Pittsburgh maybe about 2-3 years ago, and it's a wonderful city and good restaurants and just a real, it's a scrappy town. It's just really good-hearted people. And has, I think, as many bridges as Venice, Italy, going over those rivers. So I said, Rivermont Records. I wonder if he's sort of paying homage to the three rivers there in Pittsburgh and all. But there's this wonderful story you mentioned when the name was created. It's actually paying homage to where you come from, Lynchburg, Virginia. Tell us about the story of the creation of Rivermont Records.
Well, thank you. So before I started Rivermont, I had dabbled with trying to start a label because at the time I was very interested in ragtime and early jazz, and there were not many labels willing to give much attention to this music. It was not seen as something very commercially viable. So most of what was being issued in the early 2000s within this realm was, they were home-produced items, home-burned CDs, often of marginal quality. And I thought, I think I could do this a little bit better, to a little bit of a higher professionalism. And I didn't know exactly what I was doing. I just thought I could probably do it if I put my mind to it. And so I got this idea to start the record label. And for a name, I looked to my hometown, and there's a historic district in Lynchburg, Virginia, called the Rivermont District, which is centered around Rivermont Avenue. And I remember being in high school and listening to Joshua Rifkin's recordings of Scott Joplin while driving up and down Rivermont Avenue, which is this wide street with lots of old trees and old Victorian homes. I mean, it's really a beautiful area.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, Rivermont, that's a name that would mean something to me because it's based on my hometown. It's also a one-word name. I didn't want one of these label names that's 2 or 3 or 4 words, Barking Crazy Dog Records or whatever. I wanted just a single name that also wouldn't speak too much to a specific type of music in case I wanted to eventually record some classical fare, ragtime, jazz. So Rivermont was sort of a neutral sounding name that still referenced something important to me, and so that's where it came from.
And as the primary focus, would you say vintage, early jazz, ragtime, things of that nature? Is that the primary?
Yeah, the primary focus has been on sort of the whole realm of popular music from the 1890s up to about World War II. So ragtime, early jazz, dance bands of the sort of pre-swing era. But there have been a few issues on the fringe. We've done a couple blues albums. I'm working on an early country music album right now. And so it's not totally tethered to that, but that's been the emphasis.
What do you think it is about the vintage jazz sounds, that early jazz and the ragtime that speaks to you? What is it about it that really just, captures you and envelops you, that you love it so much that you've become such an aficionado of it and lover of it and flag waver for it? What is it about it, you think?
Well, I can point to 3 features of the music that I really like. One, an emphasis on melody, whether it's ragtime, whether it's dance music of the 20s. There's a real emphasis on melodies, singable tunes.
Right.
That attracts me. It's very rhythmically driven music. I like that, which is not to say it's all fast and up tempo. It isn't always. It can be slow, but there's always a propulsive rhythm guiding it. And I think third, I like the brevity of it. A lot of popular music of the 1890s to the mid 30s, 40s was limited when it was recorded by just technical limitations of the phonograph at that time. Records would play up to about 3.5 minutes per side, cylinders about the same. And so the music had to develop, had to say make its point and be done in 3.5 minutes. So there's a conciseness about it. There's an efficiency about it that I like. There's not a lot of bloat that I think sometimes creeps in once those limitations are removed and you get these 8, 9, 10, 15-minute compositions that maybe I just don't have the attention span for it, but I appreciate that conciseness.
That's really cool. It's a terrific answer. What was one of the first projects that you got involved in with Rivermont Records? What was the very first thing that you did?
So the very first thing, I was collecting records, as I said, from the time I was in preschool, and had sort of found my way into the world of 78 RPM records by the time I was in middle school. And there was one band that I found a few records of that I really liked. It was an unusual sounding band, even among all these other 20s dance bands. And that was led by a Massachusetts-based violinist named Edwin J. McAnally. And when I was in college, majoring in music, I had the option to do an independent study project. And I decided as my independent study that I would look into the history and the music of this Edwin J. McAnally. Because at that time, any of the reference books, not a mention of him. There was very little on the web about him, especially at that time. And I just said, here's somebody I would like to know more about. And so I got together with some instructors at College of William and Mary who supported me. I wrote lots of letters to historical societies around Milford, Massachusetts, where Edwin J. McAnally lived. And over the course of a year, I put together a biography of McAnally, of his band. I did some analysis of the music, and I collected all of his extant recordings. and I got to thinking, I have all the pieces here for a CD reissue of this music that would help bring it to more people's attention, because I think people should hear it. And so I made some arrangements, made some calls to people at BMG in New York, and effectively arranged to reissue the music of Edwin J. McAnally's orchestra, and that became the very first Rivermont CD. It took about a year and a half to do the whole thing. I did the sound restoration. I hooked up with somebody locally who had a very fancy, for the time, cedar sound restoration setup, and he taught me how to use it. I did the transfers, the restoration, wrote the liner notes, laid out the booklet, and in the end, enjoyed the process very, very much. Even found a distributor for the CD, sold out of the first pressing, and was encouraged by that. So that started me on the path to producing more of these, which eventually led to more or less full-time job running Rivermont.
It's incredible. There's something that I know you've been very, very excited about that I mentioned has sort of been unearthed in its own way. And I'm fascinated about the story behind all of this. And it's, of course, this. One Step to Chicago. Tell us, I know it's kind of like peekaboo. Tell us about this, and congratulations. It really, I know it's been a labor of love on many levels.
Well, thank you. So the Edwin J. McAnally CD was the first of what has since become almost 100 issues. I did eventually branch out from doing just reissues to recording modern-day pianists playing ragtime, to recording modern-day bands playing jazz and dance styles of the 20s and 30s. And a couple of years ago, at the start of the COVID pandemic, a friend of mine, musician, clarinetist Dan Levinson of New York, emailed me out of the blue, and he said, "Brian, I have this recording here that was made in 1992, and I wonder if it might be of interest to you." And he went on to describe it. He said it includes people like Peter Eklund, Dick Sudhalter, Howard Alden. I'm getting my musicians mixed up, HAs. Got Vince Giordano, Bob Haggart, Milt Hinton, Dan Barrett, Kenny DeVerne, Dick Hyman, all names that were known to me as just absolute top musicians in this field. And he said, there's a bit of a backstory, but essentially it was recorded in 1992, never issued. I'd like to get it out there. Is this something you could help out with? And when I saw the names and when I heard some samples, I said, absolutely, count me in. And we started working on it from there.
That's incredible. Tell us a little bit about George, for the folks that are listening to our show who may or may not be familiar with his work.
Sure. So this album, the short story is George Avakian, who had been a producer at Columbia Records going back to about 1940. He went on to produce albums by Miles Davis, Duke Ellington, Eddie Condon, Edith Piaf, Dave Brubeck, Louis Armstrong. I mean, he was the jazz producer at Columbia, eventually at Warner Brothers and RCA in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, into the 70s. I mean, if you pull out a jazz record from that era, there's a 50-50 chance you're going to find George Avakian's name somewhere on it as producer. But he, in 1992, gathered this group of musicians together, had them go into RCA studios in New York, cut this album paying tribute to a group of jazz musicians of the late 20s called the Austin High Gang, which included Eddie Condon, which included Bud Freeman, Gene Krupa, long before he became affiliated with Benny Goodman, and a clarinetist named Frank Teschmacher, who was just a brilliant musician. He came to the instrument fairly late and so had a rather rough, angular sound, but it was very exciting and very energetic. And Frank Teschmacher and this group made some records back in the 20s that influenced scores of jazz musicians since then. Unfortunately, Frank Teschmacher died at the age of 25 in a car accident in about 1932. So George Avakian had this group, and they wanted to pay tribute to this Austin High Gang, and they recorded this album, which was scheduled for release on a major label at the time, but essentially the costs mounted so quickly in the production of this. I mean, you have 15 top flight musicians, all of whom had to be paid, top studio engineer, top studio in New York, and effectively the record label saw the bill and just said, we can't do that, and they walked out, leaving him holding the tapes and the bill. He had financed this himself, and he spent the next 25 years trying to find a label that was interested in putting it out and, critically, reimbursing him all of his costs. And I think a lot of labels recognized the musical merit of the project, but from a business standpoint, it just didn't make sense, so they didn't bite. Unfortunately, Avakian died a couple years ago at the age of 98, having never seen it issued. But shortly before he died, he passed permission along to Dan Levinson, who was on this album, to have it issued. And so that's when Dan came to me and said, we'd like to put this out. Can you help?
That's fantastic. I noticed you even have a framed version of it behind you on the wall. That's cool, huh?
I do. Yeah, we issued it on a CD, so a small version, but we also have it out on a double record LP set because Avakian, when recording this in 1992, really wanted that old school 50s and 60s analog sound. So part of the reason it was so expensive is he had it recorded on analog tape, which in 1992 was no longer the standard. I think most studios were digital by that time, which was cheaper and easier to manage. Analog tape, studio analog tape, is very expensive, but he had it done on tape, and so to preserve that analog sound when reissuing it, I shouldn't say reissuing because it was never issued in the first place, but when issuing it, we put it on a double record set.
How cool is that? Now, I bet you tested it out on your Sesame Street phonograph first to make sure it had good sound, right?
I have not done that yet.
That's the true test.
I do still have that Sesame Street record player, but
do you?
I am embarrassed to say I have not changed the needle on that in a long time, probably since I was in middle school, and I would not trust my good records with
amazing.
A child's.
That thing on eBay, it would be worth a fortune now.
Well, you know what? That's funny, actually. I liked it so much, and I customized mine, which is to say I put stickers and wrote all over it. Mm-hmm. And a few years ago, I thought, I have a young daughter now, and maybe she would enjoy this the way I enjoyed it as a kid.
Good idea.
I was reluctant to let her play with my customized record player. So I went on eBay and I found another one just like it in working shape, almost like new. I think it was about $35. Wow. So they're not yet quite the collector's items that one might think.
I still have, I still have all the cassettes, of course, the ones we would make and everything, tape off the radio and all that, but still have all the Matchbox cars and the baseball cards and the Hot Wheels and just all these, and the records and all these things. And I think it's, I love to play the music on our Onkyo system. We have these big KLH speakers. We have the double cassette deck. We have the Onkyo turntable and the Onkyo receiver that we've had for years that still works beautifully and sounds fantastic. And we love to fill the house with the music. And I mentioned it a couple of times to friends and colleagues and even guests on this show. I love when I'm not a huge fan, and again, maybe it's a little old school. If you're on a train, you're on a plane, and you want to hear some music or you want to hear talk or whatever it is, you put the earbuds in or the little headphones on or whatever, and you shove it in your ear and you listen to it. My preferential way of listening to music, or really anything, is when it's coming out of speakers that aren't shoved in my ear, speakers that are providing sound that's bouncing off the walls, the acoustics, playing with the room, and filling the room with the sound, especially when it's music. So for me, I just prefer the sound coming out of the speakers, the big speakers, versus the iPod type thing, little thing shoved in the ear. because there's something just aesthetically pleasing to me, and I think enriching when and there's a grandiosity all of a sudden that I attach to it when it's filling a room, when it's almost becoming like a concert hall or a big studio, when it is bouncing off. I love when the music wafts through the entire house. I mean, that's fantastic. And you hear it coming from the different rooms. And also, one of my other ways that I love music, it's interesting. I really love it, not necessarily as much when it's coming like where the speakers are here and it's coming at me. I love when it's behind me. I love when it's like back here and it's coming over me. It's like washing over me from behind, or it's dropping down from speakers above or something, versus just having it right there and I'm sitting in front of it and it's just coming at me. Does that make any sense to you as a musicologist?
Absolutely. And I'm very much the same way. I enjoy the convenience of my little Bluetooth speaker. I enjoy being able to have music on the go. But when I really want to listen to something, when I really want to absorb it and enjoy it, it's got to be a full stereo system like you described. I have one downstairs and will frequently, especially when the wife's not home, like to crank that up just a little bit and have it waft all through the house. It's just a totally different experience when you have the music surrounding you in that way and not just sort of beamed directly into your ears. There's a richness that you get that I just don't think a Bluetooth speaker or a pair of headphones can ever quite replicate. And I think people who have this sort of setup know that already.
Exactly right. Yeah. It's I think it's exciting, the things that are happening, especially with this particular album. For those who are being intrigued by the album, tell us a little bit about it some more and what they can expect. One Step to Chicago.
Sure. Well, there's a bit more to the backstory, which I'll keep brief, which is that the album, as you can see there on the cover, is transcribed and directed by Dick Hyman. Really, this was, in a way, Dick Hyman's project. Now, Dick Hyman is one of the all-time great jazz pianists. His career started in, I think, about 1950. He made his first record, so he had been performing professionally before that. And he became a top studio musician as a pianist and solo artist and leader of all kinds of organizations and aggregations. And in the early 90s, Dick Hyman was director of the Jazz in July concert series at the 92nd Street Y in New York City. Very prestigious concert series. And because of his long connections in the music industry, he had access to top musicians for this concert series. And in 1992, for one of the concerts, he had arranged for it to be this tribute to the Austin High Gang of Chicago in the late 20s. And he had brought in all these musicians. And at one of the rehearsals a few weeks before the concert, he invited George Avakian to come hear the rehearsal. George Avakian, the producer, heard the rehearsal, said, "This is fantastic, I want to record it." And that's when Avakian made the arrangements for a recording. So what ended up happening is there was a concert on, I believe it was maybe a Saturday night. I don't remember exactly the day of the week. Doesn't matter. July 30th, 1992, they had the concert. And the next day, July 31st, is when Avakian brought them all into the studio to play basically the same repertoire in a studio setting. And then I already told the story about how it was recorded, mixed, mastered, everything, but then shelved because there was no budget to release it. And I sort of forget where I was going to go with this, except to say the music is... It's interesting because the way that Avakian and Hyman conceived of this was to record first strict note-for-note recreations of original recordings made in the late 1920s by Eddie Condon and Frank Teschmacher and those guys. So Dick Hyman listened very carefully to those original recordings from now almost 100 years ago and transcribed them, which is to say, by listening, he wrote out all the parts for the different instruments and gave those to the musicians who, at the concert and then at the recording the next day, played them exactly as they were on those original records. And the benefit of doing this is that those 100-year-old records, they sound good for their time, but they're not exactly high fidelity. And so having them recorded in this way by top musicians gives people the chance to hear what this music really sounded like in person, when you can hear the full range, the full dynamic range of the instruments. And the second half of the album, though, under the direction of Kenny DeVerne, a well-known jazz clarinetist, was to take tunes associated with Frank Teschmacher and play them in updated treatments. So play them more improvisationally in Kenny DeVerne's style and in the style of his band members. So the second half of the disc has a more contemporary feel to it, but it's still drawing on tunes that go back to the late 20s. So it's kind of half and half. You get strict recreation of the 20s and then a more modern interpretation of the 20s all on one album.
That is cool. That is fantastic. Again, congratulations on it. And this album, it's available by going to the website. They can get it now.
Right. It's available at rivermontrecords.com. You have your choice of CD, which, if I can just show it off a bit, comes with a nice booklet. So, you know, a typical CD comes in a jewel case. This one actually comes in a little hardcover book, and we've got 80 pages of liner notes telling you all about the session, giving you pictures from inside the recording session. Dan Levinson walks you through what it was like to be in such an all-star ensemble. So you get that on CD, or we have a double record set, which has all that same stuff in a 12-page booklet inside here. It's also available as a digital download, either lossless or MP3 formats. And of course, you can find it streaming on your favorite platforms, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon, any of those. Of course, if you stream it, you don't get the nice booklet component. So I'm partial to the physical media myself, but however you want to listen to it, it's available.
How does it feel when you lift that album, you know, and when you hold it in your hand? It brings you back a little bit. There's just, I'm sure, and it's exciting. I know the digital downloads, the CD and all that are exciting, but there's something extra special when you're actually, because you're helping to move in a forward direction, something that is already starting to happen, and that is the ever slow return and appreciation of vinyl and of the LPs. And it's introducing it also to a whole new generation who are hearing the richness and the warmth of that sound and really liking it. So you're one of many that are going in that direction by offering that. That was a conscious decision to do that. And what does it feel like when you have that in your hand? It's kind of exciting, isn't it?
It is. It's almost like a drug. I mean, I've been running Rivermont for about 20 years now. As I said, I've put out about 100 albums, a handful of which we've done on vinyl as well as CD. And the little secret is it's not been very profitable. And I think that's probably no surprise to anybody, that catering to a niche market with this kind of music is not where one goes if one wants to become a millionaire, but it's incredibly satisfying. I mean, it's so wonderful to be able to have a hand in producing music that is important to me personally and having it out there for people to enjoy and to have it in formats that I think enrich the listening experience. You know, Spotify is great if you want something quick and convenient and inexpensive. I'm not knocking it, but there is something just intensely satisfying about pulling out, you know, a real honest to goodness record and, you know, being able to admire the label art and the booklet and the art of the cover, the craftsmanship of just the physical manufacturing of it all, and then putting that onto a good turntable on a big stereo system. It just creates a room-filling sound that's very different from hooking up your phone via Bluetooth to a little speaker and just having it come at you from the corner of the kitchen. It's not quite the same. So it is very satisfying to see it and hear it in this way.
It makes it more of an experience, doesn't it?
Exactly.
To actually have to physically, you know, put it on the turntable, turn things on, and create that whole thing. It's an fuller experience on many levels.
Exactly. And having grown up with a lot of this music as a record collector myself, buying LPs from the 50s and 60s. And, from the time I was in high school, seeing George Avakian's name on all of these records that meant so much to me just as a music fan, and then having the opportunity now to contribute to the creation of a new record from George Avakian and have it in that vinyl format, just like the records I grew up with. It is a very thrilling experience.
One of the other things I know you like to do is, which I think is always terrific, and I like to do it as well. You like to, pay it forward. You like to share, your experiences and talents with those who are at those early inspirational, ages, kids. And I think that's fantastic. Tell us about that.
Well, I sometimes like to introduce young children to ragtime through programs at schools. This is a picture here from, 9 or 10 years ago when I was artistic director for the Scott Joplin International Ragtime Foundation.
You look exactly the same.
Yeah, I guess that's good.
Yeah.
But they are based in Sedalia, Missouri, because that is where Scott Joplin, who was known widely then and now as the king of ragtime writers. I mean, he's probably the most famous composer of ragtime. He was living in Sedalia, Missouri at the time he wrote his famous Maple Leaf Rag, and even about the time he was composing The Entertainer, his other very famous piece, da-da-da-dum, da-dum, da-dum. And he was in Sedalia because that was a very bustling town in the late 1890s. It was the meeting of the MK&T Railroad. It was where the cattle drivers coming up from Texas would sort of end. And there was just a lot of activity there. And that's where the red light districts were, that people like Joplin found work and found an audience for their music. And so today there's a Scott Joplin Historical Foundation in Sedalia, Missouri, that puts on the annual Scott Joplin Festival. And every year they have an artist in residence program to bring in a different performer to go around to all the area schools in that part of Missouri and introduce young children to this music that is really their local musical heritage. I mean, this is what they can take pride in. If New Orleans is the birthplace of jazz, I think of Sedalia, Missouri as sort of the birthplace of ragtime. Maybe not the birthplace, but certainly where it really was cultivated to its peak. I think I look a bit younger there.
That's a cool shot.
Still had a little hair on my forehead.
That's a cool shot too. So is this one? Now, this was at a very special event, right?
That was in New York City. You can see Vince Giordano's aluminum bass in the background. That was with Vince Giordano's Nighthawks. And this was a special fundraiser for WFUV in New York City. They had this big event. Rich Conady, who for many years hosted a program called The Big Broadcast, invited me to come over and play piano alongside the Nighthawks at this fundraiser. And that horn you see just to my left is actually attached to a phonograph, an old cylinder phonograph. A man named Peter Dilge had this old Edison cutting lathe, really, to record cylinders. So we are there recording an acoustic cylinder record. It was really, really neat. I've listened for many years to old records from the 1890s, early 1900s, and to actually make one the way they did then was very exciting. To hear myself coming back out of an old cylinder was a really neat experience.
Do you get to play a lot publicly? Do you get to, now that things are more open than they were maybe in the last 2 years, do you get to get out there and do your thing?
Well, certainly I didn't get to much these past 2 years, but
yeah,
in an ordinary year, I'd say I get to play just the right amount for me, which is I'm not at it every day. Some musicians have a sort of a nightly or weekly gig. I've never had a regular standing gig like that, but I enjoy doing standalone concerts. I enjoy performing at festivals around the country. So usually I'll go out and perform, I don't know, a half dozen times per year, which is a good amount for me.
Which is a good amount. Here's one of the albums that you guys have also released, right?
Well, that's a single. Yeah, it's a friend of mine, Martin Spitznagel, and there's a story there, which is that I met him at the Scott Joplin Festival in Missouri. I heard this guy about my age playing a really rousing rendition of U.B. Blake's Charleston Rag, which is, if you don't know it, is just a really I was going to use an expression that's maybe not polite for the air, but it's a very going piece. And when it was done, I said, "Wow, that was terrific." And we started talking. I said, "Where are you from?" He said, "Pittsburgh." I said, "No kidding, I live in Pittsburgh." And we had this shared love of early ragtime piano, and we got together after that and started working up duets that we would perform together at festivals where we were appearing. So early on, we did a duet of Cantina Band from Star Wars, which we arranged as a ragtime piano duet and put it up on YouTube. This was about 2007, and it took off. This was just a rehearsal taping that we had done before a concert. We just wanted to see what it sounded like. We had worked up this arrangement in about the 30 minutes before we turned on the camera and recorded it, and Martin said, "Let's put it on YouTube." And we did, and it's now racked up over 3.5 million views. And there are dozens of people around the world who have posted their own versions of our arrangement of the Cantina Band. So it's taken on a life of its own. And then to follow up that, we did this arrangement, A Friend Like Me, from Walt Disney's Aladdin. Just a way to bring ragtime to more modern audiences by playing music that they already know and like. Because that's what ragtime started as in the late 1800s. It was itinerant pianists taking pop tunes of the day, operatic arias, or just pop songs, and playing them in this jaunty, rhythmic style. And eventually, composers started just writing standalone rags, and now that's become its own little repertoire. If you don't already know the pieces, I think it can be hard to latch on to it. So Martin and I like to play pieces that people know, whether it's Rubber Ducky from Sesame Street or Friend Like Me, or we've done a bunch of these now, but arrange them so that modern audiences can hear tunes they know played in the ragtime style. And you can find those on YouTube.
You know, it's kind of interesting. That's kind of like what the beautiful music and easy listening genre, which was the number one music radio format for over 30 years on radio, first on AM and then when FM. One of the reasons why FM was created, so they can move that music to the FM dial, where it really then soared because of the sound and the power and clarity of FM, where they would take standards and pop songs and songs of the day and create a little bit more maybe tampered down or softer version instrumentally of the vocal favorite that you could also hear on the top 40 station or the standard station or whatever it may be, and amazing conductors and composers and arrangers and orchestrators, the Nelson Riddles and all these people, Johnny Pearson, Johnny Gregory, all these names, would be tasked with then creating easier listening, beautiful music versions of all this music, which that was kind of cool as well to hear them. I would always be excited to hear how they would interpret a popular song, how they would take the instruments, and sometimes there would be an instrument they would use in that music that almost mimicked the sound of the voice of the original singer, which I thought was ingenious.
Yeah, and a little guilty pleasure of mine, actually something that got me through writing my dissertation, is a website called Seaberg1000.com. And what they have done is collected and made available all these recordings that were made in the 60s and 70s for Seaberg background music machines, where they would take, these were machines that ordinary home buyers could not purchase. They were installed in shopping malls, they were installed in restaurants and other public places to provide that background music. And what they would do is take pop tunes of the day and arrange them with these lush instrumental arrangements, orchestral things, and take everything from Up, Up and Away by the Fifth Dimension or whatever, and just have this instrumental version. Probably use the same recordings on a lot of those beautiful music stations of the time. But the arrangements can be quite brilliant, and it makes great background music, but it also is just great music to sit and listen and relax to.
I have a ton of it. I have lots and lots of it. Yeah. We actually have a Facebook group that talks about it. It's beautiful instrumentals and vocals. And we have a lot of the people that are in that industry that have been the musicians, the songwriters, the radio executives, the producers, fans, all in it talking about that unique genre because you don't necessarily hear it on the radio like you used to. There are some secondary stations. There's Sirius XM, Escape Channel. There's some places where you can go, but they are, very, very staunchly in support of it, and then the sound and how it makes you feel. And I think it's kind of cool. So kind of like what you're celebrating as well, where it might not necessarily be something that you're hearing on all the stations, but it's such good music that it just creates a certain feeling when you hear it. And I think that's fantastic that you've made this part of your own calling to really celebrate it and to preserve it in the way that you do, release material. It really is a passion project for you, isn't it, Brian?
It is. And I'm in it because I enjoy history. I enjoy learning about the past, but I think this music is timeless, that if you take the time to listen to it, if you take the time to get to know it, it really can, this may sound trite, it can really speak to you. It can really move you in ways that maybe other music can't. And, it was music of young people at one time.
Right.
Ragtime was the music of youth in the early 20th century. Jazz was the music of the youth in the 20s and 30s. And in the old recordings, you can often hear a lot of that, vim and vigor. You can hear that youthful exuberance that transcends the intervening almost 100 years now and can still sound very lively, very engaging today. And even in these recreations that were done now 30 years ago, there's still that drive. There's that youthful energy that just I find very uplifting and motivating. And I encourage anybody with even the slightest interest to just take a listen. You can stop by the Rivermont Records website. You can hear sound samples. Or if you subscribe to Spotify, Apple Music, any of those, you can find the album there. You just have to search for One Step to Chicago, the name of the album, and give it a listen. I think you'll like it.
You know who would also really enjoy it is somebody who pops in towards the latter part of our episodes of the Jim Masters Show series. Mr. George Burns is with us.
Old Sugar Throat.
There yes. He is. He's got his cigar. He's got his red hanky. Always dapper with his tux. My aunt collected dolls, as I mentioned to everybody on the show. And tremendous collection of real collectible dolls. And when he hit that golden age, she made sure she got the collectible, and then it got passed down to me. So I had a nostalgic episode. We were talking about old TV shows and childhood memories. We were talking about toys that we all had as kids and all that fun stuff. And brought him on. They fell in love with him, the viewers, the lovities. So he pops in towards the end. He said he thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. He learned a lot. Great walk down memory lane for George Burns. And he said you knocked it out of the park as a guest on the Jim Masters Show. He really enjoyed it. So you got some levity coming from George Burns himself, Brian, huh?
What an honor. Well, thank you, George.
He loved ragtime. He loved vintage early jazz. He loved radio, of course, on Radio with Gracie and television for years. And
I like his singing. They made a joke of that for many years, but old Sugar Throat could hold his own.
That's exactly right. So he sends his best. What are some of the blessings in your life that keep you moving forward and preserving and celebrating these genres of music?
Well, I would say it's the people. I'm very fortunate to have a wife who has been very supportive of this rather unusual hobby. I guess I should have to call it a hobby, attempt at a vocation, but she's been very helpful and supportive. My family, of course, extended family has been helpful, and a lot of the customers and friends that I've made along the way who continue to support my endeavors, who buy the CDs or the records or send words of support. There's too many to name, but I'm grateful to all of them. and they're why I keep doing this. I mean, I love doing it, but if I were just producing CDs and piling them up in my basement and they were going nowhere, I wouldn't have much reason to keep doing it. So I'm appreciative to the people out there who enjoy listening to this and who enjoy sharing this and who really make it possible for me to do what I do.
Well, I tell you, it was a pleasure having you on the show, my friend. And let's stay in touch. We'd love to have you back anytime. I know this is, like you say, it's as much a business as it is a hobby, and vice versa, a hobby that's grown into a business. And I think it's fantastic because, again, it's also introducing people to music, reintroducing some to the music that they love, and introducing the music. And there's the album there, One Step to Chicago, introducing the music to generations who may not have known it ever existed, which I think is fantastic, right?
Very much. And, I just want to put one more quick plug in for my friend Dan Levinson, who was really the impetus to get this album out there and issued. He's the one who wrote the booklet for it. He's been out helping to sort of champion it as well. And I want to thank you, Jim, very much for having me here today to talk about it, and for everybody for sticking with us for over an hour now. They
do. They're always with us to the end. They can never get enough, which is really an unusual thing. I think it's because, again, the conversational way that we do it. I don't even consider these interviews. It's much more of a conversation, and I think people, like you say, with the music, I think with this style, they gravitate towards it more because they feel invested in it, and they're listening along, and they're getting something from it. It isn't just, okay, he's got a new album out. Tell us about the album. Where can you find it? Why do you love this music? And then out. It's much more, I think people also, with what our conversation represented, have an understanding of the person behind all of this, who you are, and why you love doing it, and why it's important to share the music with the world as you are. So they have a full circle appreciation of it. And when they get the music, they'll have an understanding of some of the reasons why that music has been released, and your passion for it. And I think that's important. So I think we nailed it. Any final words about our show, our conversation, anything you're excited about coming up as well, my friend?
Well, I thank you for having me here today. It's really been a blast, and I'm always working on new projects. I've got several more in the works for next year. And in the meantime, if I could put in just one more word, if folks want to check out more about this, www.rivermontrecords.com is the website address. And it is very much a labor of love, but it's the purchases from people that enable me to keep doing this. Thanks to all of you watching. Thanks to you, Jim. It's really been a pleasure.
Oh, my pleasure as well. All the lovelies enjoying it, and we thank them for being with us as well. And I hope the show met whatever expectations you had, and you definitely enjoyed the time with me, Brian, as much as I absolutely have with you.
Well, thank you, Jim. 100%, 110%. It's been great.
Spread the word about our show if you know other folks you think would like to pop on, and we will, as we always say, we'll keep the porch light on for you. You're welcome back, my friend, anytime to the Jim Masters Show, okay?
Thank you so much, Jim.
You're welcome. You be well, and you take care.
You too. Thanks. Take care.
Bye-bye now.
Bye.
Bryan S. Wright, Ph.D., and the founder and creator, owner of Rivermont Records. You can find the album and many more singles and all kinds of cool things at the website you see right there on your screen, rivermontrecords.com. What a great conversation about music, about the vintage jazz, the early jazz, about ragtime, and then some other genres that we sort of sprinkled in along the way as well. I think it was really cool. I think what he's doing is something that is amazing. As much as we've talked about the music in terms of the genre, he is, as I mentioned, a brilliant pianist as well, classically trained. And he's been doing that for a long time, and he absolutely loves that. And I love also the fact that he likes to inspire young minds too, and get them to appreciate music at many different levels. So really cool conversation. I'm sure you learned something. There's a cool shot there too. And he still has his Sesame Street phonograph. How cool is that too, huh? We appreciate him being here on the show as much as we appreciate all of you being here. And we thank Bryan for joining us on the program and really sharing the stories behind the music as well, the people behind the music, the stories. Pianist, musicologist, founder of Rivermont Records. And again, rivermontrecords.com is the website. This was a terrific conversation, great episode of the Jim Masters Show live with Bryan S. Wright, Ph.D., joining us, and with all of you joining us as well here on the program. Gang, of course, if you would like to see this episode again, right here on the Jim Masters Show, you can see it on our YouTube channel, Jim Masters TV. That's where we house hundreds and hundreds of episodes of our series. Literally hundreds and hundreds of episodes. It's really extraordinary. Don't forget to give this episode and all the episodes that you enjoy a hearty thumbs up. You'll see a little thumbs up icon on our YouTube channel. Make sure you click the one that's up. That's the go-to one. That's the I loved this episode and I love the series. Click the thumbs up icon. That is the like icon on our YouTube channel. And also leave a comment if you enjoyed this episode. And all the ones who enjoy, leave a comment underneath the episode. We really appreciate that. And many of you have been doing that on all these episodes. And we thank you so very much for doing that. Also, if you haven't actually subscribed to the channel, we would love that as well. There's a red subscribe button you see on our channel. Just click that. There's no cost for it. It welcomes you to the Jim Masters Show Levity family as well. So, and check out, you can binge watch hundreds of episodes on the channel, so you can really have a good time with all of these episodes. So for all of us here, again, we don't say goodbye around here. We say see you later, cheers, ciao, shalom, slancha, moilu, hasta la vista, sayonara. We will see you on the next one. If you join us on the next one, we appreciate that. We realize some of you watch when the shows are live, some when they are archived. However you watch and wherever you're watching from, we thank you, sincerely thank you so much for being with us as often as you are, spreading the word and sharing the levity around the world about the Jim Masters Show series. We love what we're doing here on our series, and we love the fact that you're here following along and sharing in the magic that we're creating here together, because it is a together situation. So we, again, don't say goodbye. We say see you later. And don't forget to take care of one another and to love one another. And as we always say, take care of yourself. Be sure you take care of yourself and love yourself as well. Jim Masters here, thanking you for your time this time. Till next time, I'll be back on the next episode live. Now, if you are staying on our YouTube channel right now as this episode wraps, stay right here. Another episode comes right up. And we thank you again. We'll see you again soon on the Jim Masters Show. Cheers.